Artists have often encountered great difficulties in their creative processes, and these difficulties have been important factors shaping their art. Artists who had to deal with both personal and social problems sometimes reflected these difficulties in their works and sometimes used these experiences as a form of artistic expression. Here are some famous artists and the challenges in their interesting life stories. Vincent van Gogh was born on March 30th, 1853 in Zundert, the Netherlands, and was an artist who endured many hardships and pain throughout his life. He was born the son of a pastor, and his parents had always intended to raise him to be a decent, responsible man. But Vincent's passion and dreams went far beyond his family's expectations. He recognized his interest in painting from an early age, and attempts at other professions failed to satisfy his inner artist. Over time, her life underwent a profound change as she began her journey to find her art. It was not easy for him to meet art and slowly develop an identity as an artist. At a young age, he went to work in the big galleries in Paris, but he did not find more success than he expected. He was more interested in learning and researching on his own, rather than studying fine arts. During these years, he struggled to find the money to buy the tools he needed to paint. In other words, he was constantly struggling with financial difficulties. He was often lonely and depressed, but art was his only refuge. When Van Gogh moved to Paris in 1886, the mobility of the city and his encounters with different art movements and artists sparked changes that would revolutionize his art. Van Gogh, influenced by the Impressionist artists he met here, began to use colors more vividly and boldly. The harshness and intensity of his brushstrokes added vitality to his paintings. However, his mood and personal problems sometimes darkened his creative power. In 1888, he settled in the town of Arles in the French South. Here he had an artistically productive period, but at the same time he fell into a spiritual depression. The years he lived in Arles were Van Gogh's most productive, but also his most painful. The colorful nature of the city, its warm light, yellow and green tones were reflected in his paintings. Iconic works such as Sunflowers emerged here, but loneliness and inner conflicts weighed him down even more. One day, following an internal crisis, he cut off part of his right ear. This event became a symbol of his mental disorders. After Arles, Van Gogh had to be hospitalized in a mental hospital due to health problems, but he did not stop painting here. On the contrary, he reflected his spiritual darkness in his paintings. His works, such as Starry Night, combined both the immense beauty of nature and the darkness of the depths of the human soul. Van Gogh presented not only the external world, but also his inner world to his audience. In his last years, his life became increasingly pessimistic. Mental health problems overtook him. He withdrew from his social circle and became lost in his own inner world. In the summer of 1890, he briefly left Saint-Rémy de Provence, where he created his last works, including The Last Supper and The Wheatfield and the Crows. These works show that Van Gogh's subject matter was not only nature, but also his inner conflicts. On July 29, 1890, alone in a field, he ended his life. After his death, Van Gogh's works became recognized and created an art revolution in the world. His works left a lasting mark on the art world, especially with their emotional intensity and impressive use of color. However, only one of his paintings was sold in his lifetime, and he often lived in loneliness and poverty. Vincent van Gogh's story is a combination of art and suffering. The great hardships of his life nourished his art and led to the creation of his unique and distinctive style. Van Gogh faced his inner turmoil throughout his life and reflected these confrontations in his art, leaving a lasting legacy to world art. Despite all the darkness and pain in her life, her art is a powerful expression of light and emotional intensity. Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907 in Coyoacán, Mexico. Her family had German and Mexican roots, but Frida lived a life that embraced both her own roots and the traditional culture of Mexico. Polio at an early age caused permanent damage to her right leg, which remained a kind of physical disability throughout her life. Frida, however, always had a strong character. Despite her suffering, her life was defined by her struggle. One of the turning points in Frida's life was her terrible car accident in 1925. On her way home on her bicycle, she collided with a bus and was severely injured in many parts of her body. Her spine, pelvis, and legs were broken, and her organs were severely damaged. Frida had to be hospitalized for a long time and underwent multiple surgeries. Physical pain and illness had become a part of her life, but Frida never stopped reflecting this pain in her art. During her long convalescence in bed, she became even more interested in painting. It was at this time that she began to paint in color on a brown headboard. Frida, who at first was seen by many people as just a woman painting her own life, would eventually prove herself as an artist and develop a very special language. Frida began to express all the difficulties in her life as works of art. His paintings came to reflect not only his physical suffering, but also his emotional and psychological conflicts. In her various self-portraits, she openly revealed the scars and pain of her body. By saying, "I show my own reality," she shaped her paintings not only as a reflection of her personal experiences, but also as a stance against society's view of women. Although Kahlo is often described as a surrealist, she said that she only painted what was real in her own words. In her paintings, physical pain and emotional crises were transformed into symbols of life. Another important element reflected in Frida's art was the issue of identity. As a Mexican woman, she was deeply inspired by local traditions, colors, folk art, and especially Mexico's rich cultural history. Elements such as Mexican clothing, ceramics, and local motifs often found their way into her work. However, the most striking thing in Frida's art was her struggle to find her own identity. In her inner world, she was in constant conflict with femininity, pain, and the roles imposed on women by society. By taking a stance against the norms of male-dominated society, she liberated herself in a sense and used her art as a way of expressing her identity and gender issues. One of the biggest tragedies in Frida's life was her complicated marriage. Diego Rivera was one of the most famous Mexican painters of his time and had a passionate love affair with Frida, but their marriage was filled with constant strife and separation. Despite their deep love for each other, Frida and Diego both struggled with infidelity and personal conflicts. Frida's emotional turmoil over this marriage was reflected in her work. Her famous painting, The Two Fridas, contains a deep symbolism describing this complex relationship and their inner conflicts. Physical pain, emotional difficulties, and complex relationships shaped Frida's life, while reinforcing her art. Frida's tragic life, however, ended on July 13, 1954. Although she died young, her legacy was so great that after her death, her art and personality became an icon, not only in Mexico, but around the world. Frida Kahlo's life and art go beyond the mere struggle of an artist to survive. She became a feminist and cultural icon by confronting society and its male-dominated mentality with her personal pain, physical and psychological wounds. Her paintings are an in-depth interrogation of femininity, identity, pain, and love. Frida has become an icon that has made herself known to the whole world, not only with her identity as an artist, but also with her unique stance in the struggle she fought throughout her life. Pablo Picasso is one of the most important and well-known artists of the 20th century. Born in Malaga, Spain on October 25, 1881, Picasso revolutionized the art world in both painting and sculpture and left a great impact all over the world. However, Picasso's life, like his works, was a complex, deep, and highly layered story. Picasso's interest in art dates back to his childhood. His father was also an artist and discovered young Pablo's talent for painting at an early age. As a talented student, Picasso attended the Barcelona School of Fine Arts, where he quickly made a name for himself in the art world in a very short time. However, Picasso's artistic journey was not only about technical knowledge. He was an artist who wanted to push the boundaries of art, express himself, and take a stand against social events. Picasso's artistic life shaped the most important art movements of his time, and he reinvented himself many times with different styles. In the early 1900s, he moved to Paris, where he joined revolutionary movements such as Fauvism, Impressionism, and Cubism, which brought a new perspective to painting. However, his most recognized style was Cubism. Cubism was an art movement developed by Picasso and Georges Braque. This movement disassembled objects through planes and geometric forms and reassembled them from different angles. His work, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, went down in art history as one of the most prominent examples of this movement. Picasso's art was a reflection of the changes and conflicts in his inner world. Much of her life has been shaped by personal relationships and emotional storms. His many love affairs, marriages, and separations directly influenced his art. In particular, his relationships with women such as Fernand Olivier, Olga Koklova, and Marie-Thérèse Walter turned into figures that frequently appear in Picasso's works. The women in Picasso's life both inspired him and sometimes caused him to experience dramas that deeply affected his art. Picasso often depicted women in his paintings in a disfigured, figurative, and sometimes painful way. However, his fascination with her beauty and complexity made her a symbol that he both inspired and analyzed in his work. Another important period in Picasso's art is known as the Blue Period and the Pink Period. The Blue Period, 1901 to 1904, coincides with the years when he was going through an emotionally difficult period and felt poverty deeply. Using cold blue tones in his paintings, he explored themes such as loneliness, depression, and social exclusion. The most famous work of this period is his painting titled Life. The Pink Period, 1904 to 1906, that followed was a period shaped by warmer colors, especially red and pink tones, in parallel with the positive changes in his life and his relationships. One of the biggest revolutions in Picasso's art was his development of the Cubism movement. Cubism shook the art world because it rejected traditional perspective and the naturalistic view and reconstructed objects in geometric shapes. This movement of Picasso and Braque, which questioned the depth and visual reality in painting, laid the foundations of modern art. Guernica is one of Picasso's most famous and powerful works. Symbolizing his anger and horror at the town of Guernica in Spain, which was bombed by Franco's warplanes, this gigantic painting dramatically exhibits the devastating effects of war. Picasso was not limited to painting. He also made great works in sculpture, ceramics, and graphic arts. His multifaceted understanding of art showed that he was not only a painter, but also a thinker and an innovative artist. Picasso's art brought him great fame over time and paved the way for him to become the artist of not only Spain, but the whole world. However, his life was not limited to art. Picasso also became a much-discussed figure. In particular, his complex relationships with women and his stance on social issues led some to criticize his art and personality. Towards the end of his life, Picasso's art was still going strong. The most distinctive feature of his art was a style that was shaped by constant change and evolution. His paintings contained not only the greatest innovations of the time, but also the depths and tragedies of Picasso's personal world. Picasso died on April 8, 1973, in the town of Mougins in the French South. However, his art pioneered the shaping of modern art and left a lasting mark on the art world. Pablo Picasso's life was an artist's journey, constantly evolving, pushing boundaries and questioning the cultural norms of society. His art represents one of the greatest artistic revolutions, not only of an era, but of human history. Picasso redefined the power and limits of art, not only as an artist, but as a thinker and innovative genius. Kurt Cobain was born on February 20th, 1967, in the town of Aberdeen, Washington, USA. Cobain, who became one of the most iconic names in the music world, was shaped by the pain, loneliness, and inner turmoil he experienced throughout his life. Intertwined with music from a young age, Kurt founded Nirvana in 1987 and introduced grunge music to the world. However, his music did not only speak to the outside world, it was also a reflection of the difficulties and dark emotions he experienced in his inner world. Cobain's childhood went through a difficult period with his parents' divorce. His father abandoned him, and his relationship with his mother was strained. The loneliness, alienation, and ostracization he felt at a young age also permeated Cobain's music. At the age of 14, he started playing the guitar and was expressing his inner world through his lyrics. Family problems and depression during his high school years made him even more withdrawn. For him, music was not only a passion, but also an escape and an expression of his need for his inner world. Cobain formed Nirvana in 1987 and became the leader of the grunge movement, achieving worldwide success with their 1991 album Nevermind. Smells Like Teen Spirit became not just a song, but an anthem symbolizing the rebellion of young people and their anger against the stereotypes imposed by society. However, this rapid success was a source of great pressure for Cobain. Although he had risen to the top of the music world, his inner emptiness and personal difficulties affected him deeply. Cobain was often plagued by media pressures, the responsibilities of fame, and the pressures of his career. His lyrics often dealt with themes of loneliness, alienation, depression, and addiction. In songs like Come As You Are, Heart-Shaped Box, and All Apologies, it was possible to find Cobain's inner conflicts and emotional intensity. His songs were a reflection of the frustrations and social pressures of his youth. Kurt Cobain's most challenging period in his life came after his marriage to singer Courtney Love in 1992. His marriage was both a love story and a harbinger of great chaos. During this period, Cobain began to struggle more and more with drug addiction and depression. The inner emptiness became a growing shadow for her. These emotional and physical difficulties made him even more isolated. As he struggled with health problems and addiction, he continued to feel a great burden on both his music and his personal life. On April 5, 1994, at the age of 27, Kurt Cobain ended his life. Committing suicide at his home in Seattle, Cobain shook the music world to its core. His death was a great loss not only to music, but also as a cultural figure. After Cobain's death, his music and life became even more debated. His music became a phenomenon that influenced not only a generation, but the whole world. Kurt Cobain remains an icon of the grunge movement and one of the icons of rock music. Today, Kurt Cobain is remembered not only for his music, but also as a figure who reflected his inner conflicts in his art. As an artist, he sincerely conveyed pain, loneliness, and anger to the world, and still inspires millions of people with the works he left behind. Cobain's songs still give voice to the rebellion, pain, and feelings of social exclusion that young people feel. Ludwig van Beethoven. Ludwig van Beethoven was born on December 17, 1770 in Bonn, Germany. The life of Beethoven, who left his mark on history as a musical genius, was shaped by a challenging struggle and perseverance. Beethoven was immersed in music from an early age and was introduced to it by his father's strictly disciplined teaching. His father had discovered that he was a great musical talent, but the relationship between father and son was strained by his father's sometimes harsh and oppressive behavior. Beethoven was immersed in music from a very young age and had to give concerts and teach music to support his family. However, the most decisive period in his life was when he began to experience hearing loss in his early 20s. One of the biggest turning points in Beethoven's musical career was the onset of his slowly progressive hearing loss. Beethoven, who had achieved great fame for his musical talent at a young age, also realized that he was beginning to lose the timbres in his ears. This disease, which many doctors considered incurable, turned his life upside down. However, Beethoven did not stop to overcome these obstacles and did not give up his love of making music. The loss of hearing affected his soul even more deeply, but he reflected this in his work, believing that the loss of sound only made him a stronger artist. Even in the heyday of his musical career, Beethoven's inner struggles and personal difficulties were endless. His romantic relationships were often complicated and problematic. He often experienced loneliness and disappointment in emotional relationships. Economic difficulties also followed him. Although Beethoven wanted to maintain his freedom and independence in composing his own musical works, he often went through a difficult period financially, but his music was beyond everything for him. His works expressed the emotional intensity he felt, the loneliness and struggle in his life. Despite his hearing loss, Beethoven continued to create his world-famous works. His works such as chamber music, symphonies, and piano sonatas were considered revolutionary in the music world. Especially the Ninth Symphony and Für Elise are known as the points where his music reached its peak. Due to his hearing loss, Beethoven created his works not only with a mental hearing experience, but also with an inner sensation that came from the depths of his soul. The positive messages in the Ode to Joy chorus of the Ninth Symphony were a reflection of his resilience in the face of life's difficulties. The last years of his life were one of the most challenging for Beethoven. Hearing loss, loneliness, and health problems affected him deeply, but he never lost his connection with music. In 1827, at the age of 56, Beethoven, a great musical genius, died. But the musical legacy he left behind became one of the greatest musical legacies not only of his time, but of all time. Beethoven made an unforgettable contribution to the world of art with his perseverance and passion for music in the face of human obstacles and difficulties. His music transcends a time period and remains a symbol of strength, inspiration, and freedom for all humanity. Edvard Munch was born on December 12, 1863 in the town of Loten, Norway, and experienced many tragedies and sufferings during his lifetime. Munch's life was shaped by great loss and dark emotions from the very beginning. His mother died of tuberculosis when Edvard was only 5 years old. A year later, his older sister died of the same disease. These early losses left lasting marks on Munch's life, making death, loneliness, and pain a constant theme in his artistic world. These losses in his childhood deeply affected his inner world. At a young age, he experienced great difficulties to fulfill his interest in painting due to his family's financial difficulties and the social environment he was in. However, with great determination and without the support of his family, Munch began attending art schools in Oslo and chose painting as a path for himself. Here he was first trained in classical art, but soon grew bored with traditional styles and began to develop a much deeper, emotional, and innovative style. Munch's art became a space where he expressed his inner pain. At the time, while many artists were trying to reflect society, Munch aimed to go deep into the human soul. The Scream became one of his most recognizable and powerful paintings. Completed in 1893, it depicts a figure screaming with great fear and anxiety, with a terrifying sky in the background. This painting became emblematic of the techniques Munch used to depict the dark emotions and anxieties in his life. The screaming of the figure symbolizes loneliness, fear, and a sense of existential emptiness. The scream was the most important reflection of Munch's emotional universe. The heart of his art was the expression of a person's inner restlessness. It can be said that Munch struggled with constant inner conflict and loneliness throughout his life. His art was often shaped by dark emotions, such as pain and fear. However, these emotions were reflected in his works not only as a personal experience, but also as universal human states. The Sick Child is an important painting that symbolizes Munch's longing for his sister, whom he lost at a young age, and his confrontation with death. While the painting symbolizes a moment when death is imminent, the artist also deals with the themes of human weakness and fragility. As another expression of the traumas in Munch's life, this work conveyed the phenomena of death and loss in both a personal and universal language. The colors that Munch often used in his works were another important element reflecting his emotional intensity. Especially blue and red tones deepened emotional tensions and pain. His Madonna, which he often included in his paintings, deals with themes of femininity and love, while also revealing the complex relationship between sexuality and death. Munch depicted the woman both as a figure of love and as a symbol associated with death and pain. In the later years of his life, Munch often struggled with his health and mental state. The loneliness and inner pain of his life drove him further and further away from social life. But despite this, his art was always a tool that kept him alive. With the bold and powerful expressions he used in his paintings, Munch was able to go deep into the human soul and express himself fully in his art. Towards the end of his life, the depths of Munch's art became even more evident. The works of his last years featured calmer yet dramatic compositions that reflected the transient nature of death and life. Munch died on January 23, 1944 in Oslo, Norway. After his death, his art was recognized worldwide, and his unique style became one of the most important touchstones of 20th century art. Edvard Munch's life was a story of how pain, loss, and existential angst can be transformed through art. His paintings express not only his personal pain, but also the common fears and cries of all human history and societies. Although Munch was lost in his own dark world, he managed to create a universal language about the inner world of man through his paintings. Jackson Pollock was born on January 28, 1912 in Wyoming, America, and left a huge mark on the world of modern art. Considered one of the 20th century's most revolutionary artists, Pollock is especially known as a pioneer of action painting. His art was not only a journey from figurative themes to abstraction, but also an expression of an emotional storm. By splashing or dripping paint onto the canvas, he transformed the paintings into dynamic movement. thus transforming art into an experience that combines energy, rhythm, and movement. This technique was not only an aesthetic style, but also an emotional and physical act. Pollock's life was quite challenging. Throughout his childhood, he often grew up with a sense of loneliness and abandonment as his family moved constantly. His father's abandonment of his family left a deep mark on his spiritual world. This sense of abandonment was reflected in his art throughout his life. The artist first began studying art in California, where his interest in art grew stronger and stronger. The greatest influences on his artistic career came from figurative artists such as Thomas Hart Benton and Diego Rivera. Over time, however, Pollock's artistic journey evolved away from traditional styles. In the late 1930s, Pollock settled in New York, where he joined the abstract expressionism movement. He freed himself to create an emotional intensity in his art. Works such as Number 5, 1948 are examples of his characteristic style. As Pollock splashed or dripped paint onto the canvas, he was establishing both a physical and emotional relationship. He also danced physically while painting. He used paint not only aesthetically, but also as a psychological release. Splashing paint was his way of transferring the storms of his spiritual world into the painting. Jackson Pollock faced many personal difficulties throughout his life. Alcohol addiction and mental crises played a decisive role in every stage of his art. These difficulties and inner turmoil were constantly reflected in his art. Pollock sought self-expression through abstract expressionism, especially during his darkest psychological periods. Tragically, in 1956, at the age of 44, he died in an alcohol-fueled car accident. But the work she left behind left a legacy that forever changed the history of art and profoundly influenced artists. Sylvia Plath was born in Boston on October 27, 1932. She lost her father at a young age and experienced a great trauma in the first years of her life. After the death of her father, Plath lived a difficult life with her mother and found an escape in her inner world by writing about her feelings of loneliness and loss. Her childhood and teenage years were shaped by dark themes such as death and abandonment. A bright student, Sylvia discovered her interest in poetry at an early age. However, her writing journey, which began in high school, was full of psychological problems. During his university years, he attempted suicide several times due to depression, but still continued to write. In the mid-1950s, she moved to England and studied literature at Cambridge University. Here she met the poet Ted Hughes, who would profoundly influence her life, and the two formed a relationship that inspired each other in the literary world. They married in 1956. However, their marriage became a dead end for Plath. Ted Hughes' infidelities and the tensions in their marriage hurt Plath deeply, and these troubles negatively affected her mental health. The turmoil she experienced during her married life intensified her writing and made her stand out in the literary world as she dealt with themes of pain and existential emptiness. Plath's poetry book, Ariel, published at the peak of her literary career, became one of her best-known works. This book was a masterpiece that reflected Plath's thoughts on depression, identity crisis, womanhood, and death. The deep emotions in Plath's poetry offered an intense insight into the inner world of women and turned the dark themes of her life into artistic expression. However, one of her best-known works is her only novel, The Bell Jar. It depicts a woman's conflict with the identities imposed by society and her psychological breakdown, drawing parallels with the deterioration in Sylvia's own life. The Bell Jar is a powerful account of a writer's spiritual struggles and her relationship with social pressures. But despite all this, Sylvia Plath's life was a constant struggle with inner darkness. In 1963, after her depression reached its peak, she committed suicide on February 11. Sylvia, who died at the age of 30, left a great literary legacy after her death. Her writings were not only a personal drama, but also a universal expression of womanhood, the search for identity and pain. After her death, her literary value steadily increased, and she is remembered as one of the most important writers of modern literature. As an artist who transformed her dark inner world into art, Sylvia Plath continues to shed light on the deepest corners of the human soul to this day.